The chandelier lights shimmered above the marble floors of La Chateau, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Washington, D.C. The place oozed opulence. Gold-trimmed chairs, hand-painted ceilings, and waiters gliding through the crowd with trays of caviar and vintage champagne. Tonight, the city's elite gathered, and if you were anyone who mattered, you were there. At a corner table near the panoramic windows, Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, sipped a glass of Merlot. She had grown accustomed to the spotlight. After all, working under President Donald Trump meant being at the center of the nation's most heated debates. Still in her early 30s, Karoline had made headlines for her sharp responses and unwavering commitment to defending the administration. She wasn't here for politics tonight, just a quiet dinner with a few close friends after a long week. Across the room, however, someone else was watching her with narrowed eyes. Elise Monroe, a social media powerhouse with over 5 million followers, leaned back in her chair. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table as her eyes locked onto Karoline. Known for her fiery liberal takes and viral rants against the Trump administration, Elise had built a career tearing down everything the conservative side stood for. And now, sitting just a few tables away was her next target. She really thinks she can just sit here like she's not enabling all of that? Elise scoffed under her breath, swirling her martini. Her assistant, Mia, shifted uncomfortably beside her. Maybe we should just enjoy the night, Elise, Mia suggested softly. I mean, it's a nice place. But Elise wasn't in the mood to let things slide. In her world, silence meant complicity, and she wasn't about to let Karoline have a peaceful evening without a confrontation. As the waiters moved through the dimly lit dining room, Elise adjusted her designer dress and stood up. Her camera was already recording on her phone, discreetly propped against a wine glass. If she played her cards right, this would go viral by morning. Karoline barely noticed Elise approaching until the shadow fell over her table. She looked up, her blue eyes calm but alert. Well, Elise said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. If it isn't the mouthpiece of the most corrupt administration we've ever seen. A tense hush fell over the nearby tables. Karoline set her wine glass down carefully and folded her hands. Can I help you? She asked, her tone cool and measured. You can help all of us by resigning, Elise snapped. Do you even hear yourself when you defend the things he says? The lies? The division? Or is selling your soul just part of the job description? Karoline's friends shifted uncomfortably, but she remained composed. Years in the political arena had taught her that people like Elise thrived on reactions, and she wasn't about to give her one. I'm here for dinner, Karoline said plainly. Not a debate. Elise let out a sharp laugh. Oh, you'd love to avoid debate, wouldn't you? It's easier to push propaganda when no one challenges you. But guess what? I'm here to challenge you. The murmurs around the room grew louder as diners discreetly pulled out their phones. A viral moment was brewing, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Karoline took a slow breath. She wasn't about to let some influencer rattle her, but she also wasn't going to let a lie go unanswered. If you'd like to have a civil conversation, I'm open to it, she said smoothly. But if you're just here to cause a scene, you're wasting your time. Elise's lips curled into a smirk. This was exactly what she wanted, a confrontation that would ignite the internet. But she underestimated just how prepared Karoline was. Elise Monroe wasn't about to back down. This was her moment, a chance to publicly call out one of the most visible figures in President Donald Trump's administration. With her phone discreetly recording the entire encounter, she leaned in closer, her voice rising just enough to command the room's attention. Civil conversation? Elise scoffed. You're part of an administration that doesn't understand the meaning of civil. You stand there every day defending policies that hurt real people. Families being torn apart, the rich getting richer while the rest of us suffer. And now what? You think you can just sip wine in a fancy restaurant while the rest of us deal with the mess you helped create? A ripple of whispers spread across the restaurant. Some diners stared openly, while others subtly lifted their phones to capture the unfolding drama. This wasn't just an argument, it was political theater in its rawest form. Karoline Leavitt remained seated, her expression calm but razor-sharp. Years of handling tough questions from the press had made her nearly unshakable. But she wasn't about to let Elise twist the narrative unchecked. "I don't think you understand the complexity of what I do," Karoline said, her voice steady. "It's easy to criticize from the outside, especially when your entire brand is built on outrage. But the real work, the work of governing, requires more than sound bites and social media rants." Elise's face flushed, but she didn't falter. "Oh, please," she spat. "Spare me the 'it's complicated' excuse. You lie for a living. You defend a man who undermines democracy every single day. And you act like you're some kind of patriot while you destroy the very foundation of this country." At this, Karoline's demeanor shifted ever so slightly, a glint of steel behind her polite facade. "You call me a liar," she said, tilting her head. "But tell me, when was the last time you checked the facts before posting one of your viral rants? It's easy to accuse from behind a screen, but harder to engage with the truth." The tension in the air thickened, and a few waiters hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Elise crossed her arms, her voice dripping with disdain. "You want facts? How about the fact that millions of people are losing healthcare under your administration? Or that you defend a president who calls the press the enemy of the people? Explain to me how that fits your so-called truth." Karoline took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine before answering. "The truth," she said softly, "is more nuanced than your outrage-driven narratives allow. But nuance doesn't get clicks, does it?" For the first time, Elise faltered slightly. Karoline wasn't yelling or flustered. She wasn't cracking under the pressure. Instead, she was dismantling Elise's arguments piece by piece, with a kind of quiet, practiced precision. "You profit from division," Karoline continued. "Your platform thrives on turning complex issues into black and white headlines that feed anger. And tonight, you're doing the same thing, trying to manufacture a moment to boost your brand." Elise opened her mouth to respond, but Karoline pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I'm here as a private citizen enjoying dinner with friends. You chose to interrupt that, not for justice, not for truth, but for clout. And that says more about you than it ever will about me." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Around the room, the audience that had initially seemed to lean toward Elise's outrage now looked more divided. Some nodded quietly at Karoline's poise, while others exchanged uncertain glances. For all her bluster, Elise hadn't expected Karoline to be so composed, and that rattled her. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" Elise snapped, trying to regain control. "Sitting up there in your ivory tower while the rest of us fight for justice." Karoline gave a small, knowing smile. "No," she said calmly. "I just know the difference between a real fight and a performance." The words hit their mark. Elise's confidence wavered, and for a brief moment, uncertainty flashed across her face. The narrative she had been crafting, the fearless liberal warrior confronting the evil mouthpiece, was slipping from her grasp, and Karoline knew it. Elise Monroe's chest tightened as Karoline Leavitt's calm words hung in the air. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In her mind, she had envisioned herself as the hero, the voice of the people, ripping apart the administration's most visible defender in front of a captive audience. Instead, Karoline wasn't just holding her ground. She was turning the confrontation back on Elise with unsettling ease. But Elise wasn't about to walk away empty-handed. "You talk a big game," Elise said, her voice sharper now. "But no amount of media training can hide the fact that you're complicit. Every time you stand at that podium and spin the truth, you become part of the problem. And guess what? People like me, we're not afraid to call you out." Karoline leaned back in her chair, a faint smile curving her lips. "Calling me out isn't the same as being right," she said quietly. "And shouting louder doesn't make your arguments any stronger." Elise's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the eyes of the room boring into her, the weight of every phone capturing the moment. She needed to regain control of the narrative before it slipped away completely. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "While families struggle to pay their bills, You're sitting here enjoying a $200 steak without a care in the world. Typical. Karoline's expression didn't change, but her next words cut through the room like a knife. I grew up in a middle-class family in New Hampshire, she said, her voice softer but no less powerful. I worked my way through college. Nothing was handed to me, and I'm proud to serve my country, even when it means facing people like you who twist everything for attention. The room fell eerily quiet. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crept across Elise's face. This wasn't the cold, out-of-touch bureaucrat she had imagined. Karoline was offering something far more dangerous to Elise's narrative, her humanity. Elise swallowed hard, but she wasn't ready to back down yet. So what? You're just a humble public servant doing your best? She said, her voice laced with sarcasm. Spare me. You've chosen to work for a man who attacks the free press, undermines democracy, and divides this country every single day. Karoline's smile faded, and for the first time, a flicker of something stronger crossed her face. Not anger, resolve. You know what I've chosen? She said, her voice like steel. I've chosen to serve my country. I've chosen to be in the room where decisions are made, where the stakes are real, while you sit behind a screen feeding outrage for likes and retweets. It's easy to criticize when you don't have to carry the responsibility. Elise's mouth opened to respond, but Karoline wasn't finished. You call yourself an activist, she continued, her tone unwavering. But what have you actually built? What policies have you shaped? What hard decisions have you made? It's easy to throw stones when you've never had to hold the weight of leadership. The words landed harder than Elise had anticipated. She could feel the mood of the room shifting. People who had initially cheered her on were now reconsidering. The narrative was slipping through her fingers, and panic began to creep in. Still, she tried one last push. At least I'm fighting for what's right, Elise shot back. I'm not a mouthpiece for an administration built on lies and fear. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing. Fighting for what's right? She echoed. Or fighting for attention? The question hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Elise had no immediate comeback. The woman she had tried to paint as a heartless puppet had just exposed the hollowness beneath her outrage-fueled persona. A soft buzz from her phone jolted Elise back to reality. She glanced down, her live stream comments, which had started out as a flood of support, were now turning. She's got a point. Why is Elise making a scene in a restaurant? Karoline's handling this like a pro. Elise looks desperate. Her stomach twisted. This was not the victory she had planned. Karoline took one last sip of her wine, set the glass down gracefully, and stood. For a moment, Elise thought she might deliver one final verbal blow. But instead, Karoline simply turned to the waiter nearby. Check, please, she said smoothly, as if nothing had happened. And with that, she walked away, leaving Elise alone, humiliated, and facing the cold reality that her attempt to publicly shame the White House press secretary had backfired spectacularly. Elise Monroe remained frozen in place, her face burning with a mix of anger and humiliation as Karoline Leavitt glided out of the restaurant. The polished click of Karoline's heels against the marble floor echoed louder than the murmur of onlookers still buzzing from the encounter. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Elise grabbed her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she ended the live stream. The chat section was still scrolling fast, but the tone had shifted dramatically, and not in her favor. Wow! Karoline was calm and classy. Elise just looks unhinged. This is embarrassing. Attacking someone while they're eating? Not a good look. Elise's heart pounded harder. She had planned for this confrontation to be a defining moment, a viral takedown of one of the Trump administration's most recognizable faces. Instead, Karoline had flipped the script effortlessly, leaving Elise looking petty and unprofessional. Mia, her assistant, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Maybe we should go, she suggested gently. This didn't exactly go the way you wanted. I'm fine, Elise snapped, though her voice wavered. She wasn't about to admit defeat. Not yet. She took a deep breath and pulled herself together. Damage control. That's what she needed. Within minutes, She was typing furiously on her phone, crafting a tweet to regain the narrative. When you speak truth to power, they always try to dismiss you. I will never stop holding this corrupt administration accountable, no matter how much they try to gaslight us. #resist #truth matters. She hit send and sat back, waiting for the wave of support to flood in. After all, her followers had always rallied behind her before. But as the minutes ticked by, something felt off. Instead of overwhelming praise, her notifications were filled with backlash. Elise, this was just rude. You ambushed her while she was eating. Being loud doesn't make you right. Karoline handled herself with grace. Not your best moment, Elise. Yikes. Panic clawed at her stomach. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was the hero, the truth-teller fighting against a corrupt system. But tonight, the narrative had flipped. And it was only getting worse. The next morning, the fallout hit in full force. Major news outlets had already picked up the story. Liberal influencer confronts White House press secretary and instantly regrets it, blared the headline on the Washington Sentinel. Cable news was no kinder. Footage of the confrontation looped endlessly on morning shows. Conservative hosts praised Karoline's calm and dignified response, while even liberal-leaning commentators criticized Elise's aggressive tactics. One anchor on a major network didn't hold back. Elise Monroe built her platform on calling out injustice, but this crossed a line. Public servants, whether you agree with them or not, deserve basic human decency. Karoline Leavitt wasn't dodging a press conference. She was having dinner. Attacking her in a luxury restaurant wasn't activism. It was a stunt. By mid-morning, #Elise Meltdown was trending nationwide. Elise tried to salvage her image with more posts, painting herself as the courageous underdog standing against a powerful machine. But no matter how much she spun it, the truth was clear. She had overplayed her hand. And Karoline? She didn't need to post a single thing. Her poise had spoken for itself. At the White House, Karoline sipped her morning coffee while skimming the headlines. She had expected Elise's stunt to blow up online, but even she was surprised at how quickly the tide turned against the influencer. Not exactly her finest moment, a colleague chuckled from the doorway. Karoline smiled faintly. People are smarter than some give them credit for, she said, setting down her mug. They can tell the difference between a real argument and a publicity stunt. Her phone buzzed with a message from the president's communications team. Great job staying calm last night. POTUS is impressed. Karoline allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She hadn't just survived the ambush. She had come out stronger. And in the ruthless world of Washington politics, that was no small victory. Meanwhile, in her downtown apartment, Elise Monroe sat alone, scrolling through the wreckage of her once flawless image. She had faced backlash before, but this felt different. Her sponsors were pulling back, her follower count was dropping, and the supportive comments that once filled her feeds had turned into cutting criticisms. For the first time, she wondered if she had gone too far. But the worst realization? Karoline Leavitt hadn't even needed to fight back. Elise had defeated herself. The days following the restaurant confrontation were a blur for Elise Monroe. The whirlwind of backlash refused to die down. What she had hoped would be a triumphant moment of resistance had become a cautionary tale. And the worst part? It wasn't just her critics piling on. Many of her longtime supporters were questioning her methods. Sitting on her couch in sweatpants, Elise refreshed her email inbox for the 5th time that hour. Another message from a brand partner. She knew what it would say before even opening it. Subject: contract suspension notification. Her heart sank as she scanned the cold corporate language. Another lucrative sponsorship deal gone. The brand had cited a misalignment with core values. But Elise knew the truth. No company wanted to be associated with an influencer whose name had become a punchline. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mia, her assistant. Mia, hey, I know things are rough. Maybe we should lay low for a bit. Let the dust settle. Lay low. For years, Elise had built her platform on being loud, on speaking truth to power without apology. But after her public humiliation, her words felt empty. And now, the machine she had spent so much time feeding, sponsors, fans, media outlets, was chewing her up and spitting her out. She swiped to her social media app, heart thudding as she scrolled through the relentless stream of criticism. Elise learned the hard way. Clout chasing isn't activism. She went after Karoline, and now she's paying the price. Can't believe I ever supported her. This was gross. Elise had faced backlash before, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the trolls. Ordinary people were turning against her. She had crossed an invisible line, and no amount of spin could undo the damage. For the first time, she wondered if she had been so focused on fighting the other side that she'd lost sight of why she started this journey in the first place. At the White House, Karoline Leavitt was busier than ever. The media frenzy had barely registered as a bump in her schedule. After all, the work didn't stop. Every day brought new policy announcements, press briefings, and the never-ending scrutiny that came with being the face of an administration. But the restaurant incident hadn't escaped the president's notice. That afternoon, as Karoline wrapped up a staff meeting, her phone buzzed with a message from the Oval Office. "Come by when you're free." A few minutes later, she stepped into the grand office where the leader of the free world sat behind the resolute desk. The president, a man as polarizing as he was powerful, looked up and smiled. "Karoline," he said, waving her in. "I saw what happened the other night. You handled it well." "Thank you, Mr. President," she replied, maintaining her usual professional tone. The president leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "People like her, loud, angry, they're always going to come after us. But the public, they respect strength. You didn't just defend yourself, you showed them what leadership looks like." Karoline nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride. "I believe the American people deserve facts, not theatrics," she said. He chuckled. "And that's why you're exactly where you need to be." Meanwhile, the walls were closing in on Elise Monroe. Her once thriving YouTube channel was bleeding subscribers. Brands that had once fought to partner with her were cutting ties. Her once loyal fanbase had grown disillusioned, and no amount of damage control seemed to repair her image. But what cut the deepest was the silence from other progressive influencers, people who had once rallied to her side. Instead of defending her, they were distancing themselves. One night, alone with nothing but the glow of her laptop, Elise finally faced the truth she had been avoiding. She had become everything she claimed to fight against: performative, self-serving, and disconnected from the real struggles of the people she wanted to represent. Tears pricked at her eyes as she stared at the blank screen, trying to find the right words. No spin, no blame shifting, just the truth. Finally, she hit record. "Hey everyone," she began, her voice raw. "I owe you an apology." She took a deep breath, no longer caring about the algorithms or the backlash. "When I confronted Karoline Leavitt, I told myself I was standing up for the truth. But the truth is, I let my ego take over. I wanted a viral moment more than I wanted a real conversation. And that was wrong." For the next 20 minutes, Elise laid it all bare. The pressure to perform, the temptation to chase outrage, the way she had lost sight of the causes she once cared about. "I still believe in speaking truth to power," she concluded. "But I've realized, how you speak matters just as much as what you say." When she finally uploaded the video, she didn't expect forgiveness. But for the first time in months, she felt something resembling peace. In Washington, Karoline Leavitt barely glanced at the apology video when it crossed her desk. Her work wasn't about winning arguments, it was about serving her country. And while the media would eventually move on to the next scandal, she would still be there, standing at the podium, telling the American people her truth. As far as she was concerned, Elise Monroe had learned an important lesson.